What's the haps? I'm Meroka, and today I'd like to give you my professional gaming opinion on Lake. Lake is a game I had on my big list of things to play during Narracon earlier this year. I sadly never actually got as far as checking it out during the streams we did, but I still took the time to play the demo myself afterwards, and I found myself captivated by it. Before we get too far into things, I should stress that it will be hard to show you footage from a story game without at least some kind of minor spoilers. I will keep it to a minimum, but ye be warned. Lake is one of those little slice-of-life stories I do love so much. The year is 1986. You play Meredith Weiss, a 40-something woman returning from the big city to Providence Oaks, the town she grew up in, to cover her dad's job as the mail carrier for a couple of weeks while her parents are on holiday. You'll get given a van and a daily delivery round, which is the perfect setup for meeting all the town's residents, old and new. You'll meet folks from Meredith's past, 22 years on, as well as new faces who moved to the area or grown up there in the intervening time. The town is full of personalities. Some are charming, some quirky, and there's a couple of abrasive ones. And then occasionally someone will ask you to do them a favour, which will add an extra location onto your map to visit during your round, or they'll ask to do something with you after work. That's actually kind of the whole game. You do this for 2 weeks, with Sundays off, so ultimately for 12 days, at the end of which Meredith has a choice to make, one which you'll almost certainly see coming a mile off. Go back to the big city and the well-paid office job, or settle down in her hometown and enjoy a more relaxed pace of life. There's ostensibly actually 3 endings, the third being unlocked through the choices you make, and then on top of this, the relationships you forge with the townsfolk adds a little extra variety to these endings. Or at least I assume so. The ending I got very much felt like a variation on a typical ending, and Lord knows I'm not dedicated enough to this review business to replay half the game just to see what dialogue changes. There's also a couple of romanceable characters you'll meet, one man and one woman, making Meredith canonically bisexual, so hooray for positive LGBTQ+ representation. These two are by far the biggest influence on the endings. Do you want to pursue a different life with your newfound love interest, or is the draw of your old life too much for one person to change? I actually think that while such a life choice would be a monumental decision for anyone in reality, coming at it from the perspective of the player imparts a considerable amount of bias here. While Meredith doesn't seem to actively hate her job working in QA at a software company, and she has good career prospects, her boss is just the worst. A real Bill Lumbergh character, if you know what I mean.
I'm gonna need you to go ahead and come in tomorrow. So if you could be here around 9, that would be great. Okay?
And he keeps giving her work to do while she's away on her holiday, in which she's already working. And that is basically all we know about her life pre-Providence Oaks. On the other hand, life in the country is fun, relaxed and idyllic, and settling down with a charming other half to enjoy the serenity seems like the only real choice on the table. Maybe if you're sociopathically career-minded, the city job sounds appealing, but then what are you doing playing video games and watching reviews? Don't you have overtime to be doing in the hopes that management will notice and throw you a bone? Most humans, I suspect, will opt for life in the country with a cutie. Whether our attitudes to a lesbian relationship in 1986 would have been as accepting as they're portrayed, I'm not so sure about. My understanding is that lesbianism didn't really get a great deal of cultural acceptance until the Lesbian Avengers came along in the 90s, so everyone being like, oh, lesbians, that's cool and unremarkable, feels a bit anachronous. But then also maybe we don't want a bunch of homophobia in the chill good vibes game, so perhaps we can let it slide. Also, a potential detractor in the decision-making game, for something tagged on Steam as Choices Matter, is that outside of which ending do you want, there aren't vast amounts of real decisions to be made. Yep, characters will ask you to do stuff for them pretty much every day, but there is absolutely no reason to decline. Say yes to everything. I think there's maybe one evening where you can double book yourself, but Meredith still does both things. It just seems to queue up the cutscenes. The only thing I said no to was the boss asking me to work during my holiday, because he clearly doesn't respect my time.
I'm also gonna need you to go ahead and come in on Sunday, too, okay?
Some light research suggests that all that denied me was an achievement. It didn't actually change the nature of our relationship. I didn't get fired. Hell, he couldn't wait for me to get back in spite of my basically telling him to do on every phone call. So the only decision you're ever getting is, do you want more story? It's a narrative game, it lives or dies by its story. So, yes? It's honestly a good job it is a good story though, because it's really all it's got. It's a very pretty lake, really it is, but even that loses a little of its charm by the time you've lapped it 12 times. The world really is a paper-thin facade, you don't have to stray far to see behind the curtain. Reports of bugs are pretty frequent, even if I only encountered a couple. Driving physics is simply non-existent. Crash headlong into an oncoming car? You both just stop. Throw the van off the top of a hill, it takes it like a champ. And there are very, very few character animations, even in cutscenes. There's a fade to black when getting in and out of the van to avoid having to animate that. There's a bunch of frankly awful cinematography cutting away from characters constantly to avoid having to show them actually doing anything. To say nothing of the characters you just have conversations with through closed doors so that you don't have to see them at all. Of course, this is obviously the natural consequence of a tiny indie team working with probably an even tinier budget, and you have to use your imagination or suspend your disbelief a bit, but the sheer amount of cut corners eventually gets a bit overwhelming. The soundtrack is charming enough, maybe not the 80s vibes the rest of the game might lead you to expect, because everything's sprinkled so liberally with 80s cultural references. The video shop has parody versions of classic 80s movies. In fact, more than that, I think they're all films from specifically 1986, as though no older films exist. You can talk to Angie, who runs the place, about actual real films, also from 1986, and Kay, your childhood BFF, is big into music and gushes about all her favourite 80s artists. But I guess the licensing for Journey was a bit too much. Again, tiny team, tiny budget, of course it was. So yeah, the soundtrack's more folk and country stuff, which, you know, fits the small town local radio vibe perfectly. A lot of driving themes I noticed. It's catchy enough that I've had them stuck in my head for a few days. I do wish there were more songs though. There's 10 songs in the regular radio rotation, but it felt a lot like I heard the same few over and over again. When delivering to the DJ at one point he tells you he's planning to expand his playlist. He doesn't. All in all, in my professional gaming opinion, I'm actually quite happy to recommend Lake. Despite its imperfections, it's still a genuinely enjoyable and charming story. A solid 6 hours or so of good vibes. Maybe if they sell enough copies we can get to see a Lake remastered, with all those annoying cut corners uncut by virtue of a bigger budget. Thanks, as always, to my lovely channel members Weirta, Tolkus and the Disney Princess of Mars for supporting what I do here. If you'd like to see your name in the credits alongside them, consider becoming a channel member by hitting the join button below. Also, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and if not, feel free to leave a dislike instead. Either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.